Autumn Reed had never stepped foot inside Le Serene, the kind of waterfront restaurant where polished marble floors reflected warm chandeliers and the Manhattan skyline shimmered like a silent promise through the glass walls. But tonight wasn't about her. It was about Mason, her sweet, wide-eyed 7-year-old who'd spent the whole day practicing how to blow out his candles without spitting on the cake. She'd saved for months, scraping together every spare dollar so her son could have a birthday memory he'd never forget. And when he grinned at the waiter carrying a tiny chocolate cake toward their table, Autumn felt, for the first time in a long while, that she'd done something right. "Mom, do you think Dad will call soon?" Mason whispered, twisting the edge of his napkin. Autumn's smile wavered just slightly. "Maybe, sweetheart. He's busy tonight." Busy. That was the word Caleb had texted earlier, tossed out carelessly like a pebble into a deep well. No apology, no explanation, no "happy birthday, son." Autumn pushed the ache aside. "Come on," she said softly. "Make a wish." Mason closed his eyes. One breath, one flicker of hope. The candles went out, and the restaurant doors opened. Autumn looked up automatically, then froze. Caleb Reed walked in, tall, composed, wearing the tailored coat she bought him last Christmas. But it wasn't the coat that made Autumn's heart stop. It was the woman on his arm. Young, stunning, laughing softly as Caleb rested his hand on the small of her back, like it belonged there. The room didn't go silent, but Autumn did. Her pulse rang in her ears as Caleb guided the woman toward a table not 20 feet from where she sat. Mason turned, eyes widening, confusion already forming on his little face. "Mom, that looks like Dad." Autumn's throat tightened as Caleb finally looked up, and their eyes collided across the glowing dining room. And that was when everything inside her began to break. Autumn Reed had never imagined herself walking through the doors of a place like Le Serene. For most people in Manhattan, it was just another upscale restaurant perched over the water with a postcard view of the skyline. But for Autumn, it felt like stepping into another world. A world she never belonged to, one she used to admire only through glowing photos on Instagram or glossy magazine covers while folding laundry late at night. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about elegance or price tags. Tonight was Mason's 7th birthday, and Autumn wanted him to feel special, even if she had to scrape every bit of savings she had managed to hide from Caleb's controlling eyes. She remembered counting tips at midnight, transferring $20 at a time into a tiny savings account under her maiden name. She remembered skipping lunches at work, choosing instant coffee over her usual Starbucks, just to stretch every dollar a little further. She remembered telling Mason weeks earlier, "This year, honey, we're doing something unforgettable." His face had lit up, and from that moment, Autumn knew she had to make it happen, no matter how hard it would be. Walking into the restaurant earlier that evening, she'd felt her palms sweat. The hostess greeted her with a polished smile, the kind she usually reserved for high-profile clients and influencers who booked window tables months in advance. Autumn smoothed the thrift store dress she had ironed 3 times to make look new. She tried to ignore how out of place she felt among pearls, tailored suits, and the soft clink of crystal glasses. But when Mason gasped at the view, "Mom, it looks like the whole city is glowing," every insecurity melted away. "This is for you," she whispered. "You deserve this." She didn't tell him she had never been taken to a restaurant like this as a child. She didn't tell him she promised herself he would never feel the same kind of smallness she once carried. She didn't tell him how hard she'd worked so he could feel celebrated, even if his father had forgotten. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect, like the world had paused just to give Mason joy. Autumn let herself believe the night would stay that way. She had no idea the storm was already walking toward her. There was a time when Caleb Reed wasn't a stranger to his own family. Before the late nights, before the unexplained trips to Midtown, before the cold silence that slowly filled their home, he had once been the man Autumn thought she would grow old with. In the early years of their marriage, Caleb used to wait for her outside work with takeout boxes and that boyish grin she couldn't resist. He used to carry Mason on his shoulders through Central Park, pointing at kites and pretending he could chase them down. He used to say things like, "We're going to give Mason the kind of childhood we never had." And Autumn believed him. But somewhere along the way, ambition devoured everything gentle inside him. It started small, a missed dinner, a forgotten promise, a shift in his tone whenever she asked why he was late again. Then came the new wardrobe, the fancy cologne she didn't recognize, the way he started guarding his phone like it held national secrets. Autumn tried to explain away the signs, telling herself he was stressed, overworked, exhausted. But deep down she felt the slow unthreading of the man she married. He began criticizing everything. How she packed Mason's lunches, how she folded the laundry, how she didn't understand the pressure of being the breadwinner. And Autumn absorbed every blow quietly, the way a tired woman often does, until she no longer remembered the sound of her own laughter. What hurt the most wasn't the neglect, it was the rewrites. Caleb had a way of twisting stories until she questioned her own memory. If Autumn asked why he didn't come home until 2 a.m., he'd snap, "Do you enjoy accusing me?" If she mentioned Mason missing him, he'd sigh dramatically. "I'm working for this family. I'm doing everything for you two." But the truth was simpler, colder, and sitting right now at a table across from her at Le Serene. Caleb wasn't working late. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't tired. He was gone long before Autumn realized she'd been living with a ghost who still demanded she pretend their family was whole. And as she watched him laugh softly at Harper's whisper, Autumn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not jealousy, but an awakening. Tonight, the truth refused to stay buried. Mason Reed had always been the kind of child who believed the world was kinder than it actually was. At 7 years old, he still thought every broken promise had a good reason behind it, that every adult eventually told the truth, and that his father, no matter how many times he failed to show up, loved him in ways he simply didn't know how to say. Autumn wished she could protect that innocence forever. Earlier that morning, Mason woke up before dawn, shaking her shoulder gently. "Mom, is it time for my birthday yet?" he whispered, eyes bright with anticipation. Autumn smiled through sleep. "It's been your birthday for 7 hours already." He giggled, darting off to cram his small backpack with treasures he thought he might need. A Lego astronaut, a wrinkled drawing he made of their family, and the blue Matchbox car Caleb bought him 2 years ago. The last gift from his father that wasn't an afterthought. At breakfast, Mason practiced blowing out a single candle stuck in a pancake. "Do you think Dad will come tonight?" he asked between bites. Autumn paused. She didn't want to lie, but she couldn't crush him. "I think your dad knows today is important." Which was technically true. Caleb should have known. The rest of the day, Mason kept checking the clock, counting the hours until dinner. He refused to let Autumn carry his gift bag, insisting, "Dad will want to see what I made for him too." By the time they arrived at Le Serene, Mason was practically bouncing with excitement. The view, the soft music, the fancy tablecloths, everything felt magical to him. He pressed his nose to the glass, staring at the skyline. "It looks like all the buildings are celebrating with me," he said. Autumn wished the night could have ended right there, with that smile. But when Mason turned and spotted Caleb walking in with Harper, something inside him shifted. His shoulders lowered, his eyes dimmed. Confusion spread across his face like a shadow. "Mom?" His voice cracked in a way Autumn had never heard before. It was the sound of innocence beginning to fracture. And as Mason clutched her arm, Autumn understood one thing with painful clarity. Tonight, she wasn't just witnessing the end of a marriage. She was watching her son's little heart break for the first time. Caleb Reed hadn't just forgotten Mason's birthday. He'd erased it from his mind entirely, like it was a trivial appointment he could reschedule. For Autumn, the moment that truth settled in was hours before Lisserine, when her phone buzzed with the one message she had been dreading. "Running late. Big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up." "No, happy birthday, son. No, tell Mason I love him." Nothing. Autumn had stared at the glowing screen, numb. She typed back twice, deleted both drafts, and finally sent nothing. There was no point. Caleb had made a choice, and it wasn't them. She held the phone tightly, trying to breathe. She had promised herself not to cry today, not on Mason's day. When Mason asked, "Is Dad excited too?" she forced a smile that felt like it might crack. "Sweetheart, your dad, he's got a lot going on, but he knows he's lucky to have you." A half-truth, a tiny shield for a child who still worshipped his father. But the truth hit Autumn in waves. She remembered Mason saving Caleb the last slice of pizza, just in case Dad comes home. She remembered the way Mason held his drawings to the door, hoping Caleb would walk in at the right moment. She remembered all the promises Caleb made and forgot like they were raindrops sliding off a car windshield. By the time she and Mason arrived at Lisserine, Autumn had accepted, with quiet heartbreak, that Caleb wasn't coming. She had rehearsed a dozen gentle explanations for Mason. She had prepared her heart to absorb his disappointment. What she hadn't prepared for was reality's cruel twist. She hadn't expected Caleb to walk through the doors of the same restaurant she chose, with another woman on his arm. She hadn't expected Mason to witness it. She hadn't expected the universe to take the one night she tried to save and shatter it. Because forgetting the birthday was one wound. Walking into the same restaurant with his mistress, on the very night Autumn was trying to protect their son's heart, was something else entirely. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal with perfect timing. The kind that wasn't accidental. The kind that leaves scars. For Autumn Reed, Lisserine felt like stepping onto another planet, one she had admired from a distance, but never dared to enter. The soft jazz drifting through the room, the glow of candlelight bouncing off crystal glasses, the gentle clatter of silverware. It was the kind of world people like her weren't invited into. But tonight, she wasn't here to fit in. She was here to give Mason a memory untouched by disappointment. The hostess led them to a table by the window, the kind usually reserved for anniversaries, engagements, or people who wore confidence like a tailored suit. Autumn only wore a thrifted dress and hope. But when she saw Mason's eyes widen at the sweeping view of Manhattan glittering against the river, she felt something warm bloom inside her chest. "Mom, this place is like a movie," Mason whispered, leaning closer to the glass. Autumn smiled. "Then tonight, you're the star." She ordered Mason's favorite, butter pasta with grilled chicken. Something simple, safe, familiar. She wasn't sure if he would like any of the fancier dishes, and she didn't want tonight to have even one wrong step. The waiter returned with warm bread, poured sparkling water into tall glasses, and spoke to Mason like he was a young gentleman. Mason sat up straighter, proud. For a moment, it was perfect. Quiet, golden. Something fragile but beautiful. Autumn let herself breathe. She glanced around the room, noticing details she never thought she'd see up close. A couple celebrating an anniversary with champagne. A family dressed in elegant evening clothes. Business executives murmuring over contracts. She didn't fit into any of these worlds, but somehow, being here for Mason made her feel like she belonged anyway. Mason swung his small legs under the table. "Mom, do you think Dad would like this place?" Autumn hesitated. She hated lying, but she hated hurting him more. "I think he'd want you to enjoy it," she said softly. Mason nodded, accepting the answer with the innocence only children have. The pasta arrived steaming, Mason's laughter filled the air, and Autumn finally let her shoulders relax. Maybe, just maybe, the night could still be beautiful. But beauty is fragile, and just as Mason lifted his fork for the first bite, the door opened behind them, and fate walked in, wearing Caleb Reed's face. The moment the door to Le Serene opened, Autumn felt a strange chill crawl up her spine, as if her body sensed the disaster before her eyes did. She looked up casually, expecting another couple or a late reservation walking in. Instead, the universe chose cruelty. Caleb Reed walked through the entrance like the star of a life he no longer shared with them. He wasn't rushed, stressed, or exhausted like he claimed in his text hours earlier. He looked composed, confident, almost radiant under the chandelier's golden wash. But what froze Autumn wasn't him. It was her. Harper Sloane. A woman so effortlessly stunning it felt unfair. Long dark hair cascading over a satin dress, a smile practiced enough to look natural, and a hand looped comfortably through the arm that once belonged to Autumn's world. Caleb's hand rested on Harper's back with a familiarity that ripped through Autumn like a blade. For a moment, time lost its rhythm. The clinking glasses, the jazz music, the murmured conversations, everything blurred behind the thundering in Autumn's ears. Her mind scrambled for explanations. A work dinner? A client? A mistake? But then Harper leaned in, laughing at something Caleb whispered, her fingers brushing his chest. No, this wasn't business. This wasn't accidental. This was betrayal. Dressed in satin and confidence, walking straight into her son's birthday dinner. Mason saw them next. His small hand froze midair, fork dangling. His smile slipped, confusion clouding his eyes. "Mom, that's Dad," he whispered, voice trembling. Autumn's breath caught. Caleb finally looked up, and the instant his eyes met Autumn's, his entire expression shifted. The ease evaporated. His jaw tightened, his posture locked. It was the reaction of a man caught in a lie he couldn't talk his way out of. Harper followed his gaze, her smile fading as she spotted Autumn, then Mason, then the single birthday candle still melting on the cake. A flicker of something, shock, guilt, irritation, crossed her face. Autumn stood slowly, palms numb. Mason clutched her sleeve, desperate for answers she did not yet know how to give. Across the room, Caleb took one involuntary step back. Because in that single, devastating moment, the life he built on secrets finally collided with the family he abandoned. Autumn didn't remember standing up. Her body moved before her mind caught up, pushed by something raw and instinctive, the need to shield her son from the wreckage unfolding in front of them. Across the dining room, Caleb stiffened, as if someone had yanked an invisible wire down his spine. Harper's hand slipped from his arm, confusion or annoyance flickering across her perfectly made-up face. Autumn's voice trembled when she spoke, not from fear, but from a heartbreak too heavy to hide. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" He blinked, once, twice, the way liars do when desperately scanning for the cleanest lie. "What are you doing here?" he countered, his tone sharp, defensive. "Are you following me now?" Autumn's breath caught. The audacity felt like a slap. "You forgot your son's birthday," she said, trying not to break in front of strangers. "I brought Mason here because you said you were working late." Mason pressed closer to her, his small fingers gripping her dress. "Dad?" he whispered. "Why are you with her?" Caleb swallowed hard, glancing around as if calculating his exit strategy. Eyes from surrounding tables had already begun turning their way. Wealthy patrons, executives, couples, everyone sensing the drama spilling into their pristine dining atmosphere. Harper stepped forward, attempting a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Caleb, maybe we should stay out of this," he snapped under his breath, though not quietly enough. The room's temperature seemed to shift. Autumn's heart twisted, but something inside her steadied. "No," she said softly. "She is part of this, apparently." Harper's expression tightened, annoyance now replacing confusion. "I didn't know he had plans with his family tonight," she said, though her tone suggested she regretted saying even that much. Autumn almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. Plans? A birthday? A child waiting with a handmade gift? Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face, exasperated. "This is not the place, Autumn." "But it's the place you chose," she answered, her voice breaking but resolute. For the first time, Harper looked uncomfortable, truly uncomfortable. She stepped slightly away from Caleb, as if the heat of his choices was finally reaching her. Autumn felt Mason lean into her, his breath unsteady. In that moment, with chandeliers glittering above, Betrayal unraveling beside her, and her son trembling at her side, something powerful settled inside Autumn Reed. Not rage, not revenge. Clarity. This was the moment she stopped protecting Caleb's lies and began protecting her own life. Just when Autumn felt her knees threaten to buckle, a shadow moved from a nearby table, calm, deliberate, and strangely familiar. She turned, startled, as a tall man in a charcoal suit approached with the steady confidence of someone used to walking into chaos and cooling it with presence alone. Dr. Adrian Blake. She hadn't seen him in over a year, not since Mason's asthma checkup at the community clinic where Adrian sometimes volunteered. She remembered his gentle tone, the way he spoke to Mason with more patience than most doctors ever managed. She never expected he would show up in a place like La Serene, or that he'd be walking straight toward her now. "Autumn?" he said softly, concern threading through his voice. "Is everything all right?" Caleb stiffened instantly. "Who are you?" Adrian didn't even look at him. His focus remained on Autumn, and then on Mason, who was half hiding behind her, his face pale and confused. Autumn opened her mouth, but her voice faltered. I don't know." Adrian shifted slightly, placing himself beside her in a subtle gesture of support, not invasive, not presumptuous, but grounding. His presence alone seemed to steady the air around her. Caleb scoffed. "This is a private matter." Adrian finally turned to him, posture calm but unyielding. "You brought your private matter into a public place," he said evenly. "And your son is clearly distressed." Harper blinked, taken aback. She wasn't used to being challenged in rooms like this. "Look, we really don't want trouble. No one wants trouble," Adrian replied, voice gentle but firm. "But a child is hurting. That takes priority." Something flickered across Caleb's face. Defensiveness, embarrassment, maybe even fear of how this looked to the wealthy patrons around them. Mason tugged Autumn's sleeve. "Mom, can we go home?" The quiet plea nearly broke her. Adrian leaned slightly toward her. "If you'd like," he said, "I can walk you both out, just to give you a moment to breathe." Caleb stepped forward, anger flashing. "She doesn't need your help." Autumn inhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes when choosing a different future. For the first time that night, she looked Caleb directly in the eyes, steady and unafraid. "I do," she said, "and so does our son." A hush fell over the nearby tables, because in that moment, Autumn wasn't alone anymore. Autumn didn't remember the walk from the table to the exit. She only remembered Mason's small hand gripping hers, trembling with confusion, and the comforting presence of Dr. Adrian Blake walking a careful half-step behind them, close enough to protect, far enough to respect her space. Outside, the cool night air kissed her face, sharp and sobering. Brooklyn Bridge glowed above the water, its reflection trembling like Autumn's heartbeat. Mason sniffed, wiping his cheek with the back of his sleeve. "Mom, did I do something wrong? Is that why Dad didn't want to sit with us?" The question hit harder than anything Caleb had said inside that restaurant. Autumn knelt, cupping Mason's cheeks. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is because of you." "But Dad looked mad," Mason whispered. "And he had his arm around that lady." Autumn's throat tightened. She wanted to protect him from this reality, to shield him from the cruelty of adult failures. But the truth had walked straight into their night, wearing heels and lipstick. Before she could respond, Adrian crouched beside them, his voice gentle. "Mason, sometimes adults make mistakes so big they forget the people who love them most. But that's not your fault." Mason blinked at him, absorbing the words like a child trying to make sense of heartbreak for the first time. Autumn looked at Adrian, really looked at him. Calm, steady, kind. He had stepped into chaos without hesitation, not out of ego, but instinct. He didn't know the details, yet somehow understood everything that mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't owe me thanks," he replied softly. "You just deserve not to go through this alone." Before Autumn could respond, the restaurant doors burst open. Caleb stormed out, jaw tight, hands balled into fists. "Autumn, we need to talk. Now." Adrian straightened immediately, his posture shifting from gentle to protective. "This isn't the time," he said firmly. "Your son is upset. Leave them be." Caleb's glare snapped to him. "You stay out of my family." Autumn finally rose to her feet, exhaustion turning into a quiet, shaking strength. "You stayed out of it first," she said. "Long before tonight." Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came. Not with Mason watching. Not with Adrian standing between them like a wall he couldn't break. And for the first time, Caleb Reed looked unsure of the control he thought he'd never lose. The morning after Le Serene felt strangely quiet, as if Autumn's entire world were holding its breath. The apartment, usually filled with Mason's chatter, was muted. He colored absent-mindedly at the kitchen table while Autumn packed his school bag with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't sleep, not even for a moment. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caleb's hand on Harper's back, saw Mason's face crumble, heard Caleb accusing her as if she were the one doing something wrong. After dropping Mason off, Autumn drove home in silence, until her gas light blinked on. She pulled into a station and reached for her debit card. Declined. Her heart dropped. She tried again. Declined. Confused, she opened her banking app, and the breath whooshed out of her chest. Caleb had transferred nearly all the money out of their joint account, left her with $14.27. The betrayal at the restaurant was emotional. This one was survival. Hands trembling, Autumn scrolled. That's when she saw it. Multiple luxury charges. Hotel rooms at the Langford, dinner reservations at upscale Manhattan restaurants, jewelry store receipts, ride-share trips at 1 a.m., all within the last 3 months. All paid with their money. Autumn sat in her car, frozen, as the truth closed around her like cold metal. Caleb didn't just cheat. He funded his new life with the money she saved, the money meant for Mason's school shoes, groceries, rent, everything. And as if the universe wanted to twist the knife deeper, a notification popped up at the top of her screen. Your credit card payment is overdue. Except Autumn had never missed a payment in her life. Her stomach knotted as she opened the account. Charges she didn't recognize filled the bill. Designer clothes, a weekend spa retreat, 2 first-class plane tickets. Caleb had not only drained their savings, he'd secretly opened a credit line in her name. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't an accident. It was strategy. A slow, calculated exit plan she never saw coming. A plan that left her financially cornered, emotionally broken, and holding the consequences of a life she didn't choose. As she stared at the glowing phone screen, one truth echoed through her mind with brutal clarity. Caleb wasn't just unfaithful. He was building a life without her, using her as the foundation. And Autumn Reed had finally uncovered the full extent of his double life. Autumn stood in front of Caleb's office building on Park Avenue, holding the folder of bank statements, credit card charges, and screenshots she'd printed at dawn. She didn't know what she expected: remorse, panic, explanations. But she needed answers. Not for the marriage, for her survival. Inside the lobby, everything felt too polished, too cold. Glass walls, sleek marble, people in tailored suits rushing past her as if nothing in the world could shake them. Autumn felt painfully out of place, but she tightened her grip on the folder and stepped toward the elevator. By the time she reached the 17th floor, her heartbeat was a drum. Caleb's assistant, a young woman with perfectly straight blonde hair, looked up from her desk. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Autumn said, voice tight. "I'm his wife." A flicker of discomfort flashed across the assistant's expression. "Let me check if he's available." But Autumn didn't wait. She walked past her, pushed the office door open, and froze. Harper Sloan was sitting on Caleb's lap. Not next to him, not across from him. On his lap. Her arms around his shoulders, her lips grazing his jaw as she whispered something that made him grin. A grin she hadn't seen in years. The sound Autumn made wasn't a gasp. It was something quieter, deeper, like a heart cracking in real time. Caleb jerked upright. "Autumn, what are you doing here?" Harper slid off him gracefully, smoothing her skirt with a smug smile that made Autumn's stomach twist. "You told me she was overreacting," Harper murmured, crossing her arms. Autumn's hands shook as she held up the folder. "You drained our accounts. You opened credit in my name. Caleb, what is this?" Caleb's expression hardened instantly, from surprise to irritation to ice-cold calculation. "You shouldn't go through my financials," he snapped. "That's an invasion of privacy." Autumn blinked. "Our joint savings? The credit card you opened under my name?" "That's an invasion of my life." Caleb stood, adjusting his tie like he was prepping for a board meeting instead of the collapse of his marriage. "Look, Autumn, I've been planning things differently for months, and I need you to stop creating scenes, especially here." Harper leaned against the desk, lips curling. "Maybe it's time you let go, Autumn. Some marriages just expire." Autumn stared at them, the man who vowed to protect her, and the woman who replaced her without a second thought. Then Caleb delivered the final blow. "I want you out of the apartment by the end of the week." The room spun. Because in that moment, Caleb wasn't just breaking their family. He was erasing Autumn's place in it entirely. Autumn Reed didn't remember leaving Caleb's office. One moment she was staring at the man who vowed forever, watching him shove her out of the life they built. And the next she was sitting in her car in the parking garage, folder still clutched in her trembling hands. Her vision blurred, her breath stuttered. The weight of everything, financial ruin, betrayal, humiliation, crashed over her like a brutal wave she couldn't swim through. She tried to inhale, but the sob that escaped was sharp and broken. Mason. The single thought sliced through the panic. Her son, her responsibility, her reason to keep breathing. Autumn pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and cried in a way she had never allowed herself to cry before. Messy, raw, uncontrollable. The kind of grief that only comes when someone steals the future you thought you had. By the time she drove home, her eyes were swollen, her chest tight. She opened the apartment door to find Mason building a Lego tower on the living room floor. His face lit up. "Mom, look! I made a birthday tower!" His innocence shattered her all over again. But she couldn't crumble, not in front of him. So she swallowed the ache, knelt beside him, and forced a smile that hurt her cheeks. "It's perfect, sweetheart." That night, after Mason fell asleep clutching his new toy car, Autumn sat alone in the dim kitchen, surrounded by unpaid bills, bank alerts, and the empty silence Caleb left behind. She stared at the stack of evidence, financial betrayal, layered over emotional betrayal, and wondered how much more she could lose. Then came the final blow. Her phone buzzed. Email from the leasing office. We've received notification from your husband requesting removal of your name from the lease due to relocation.
Please confirm move-out date. Autumn's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb wasn't just pushing her out emotionally. He was orchestrating her eviction. Quick, silent, calculated. The man who promised to protect her was now dismantling her life piece by piece. For a long moment, Autumn sat still, the world muted around her. Then something unexpected stirred in her chest, small, faint, but real. Not rage, not despair. A spark, a whisper inside her saying, "You will not let him destroy you, not anymore." It wasn't strength yet, but it was the beginning of it. The next morning, Autumn stepped outside her apartment building with a heaviness that clung to her like wet clothing. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw eviction notices, drained bank accounts, Caleb's cold voice saying, "I want you out." She needed time to think. Time she didn't have. As she crossed the parking lot, a familiar voice called out gently, "Autumn?" She turned, startled, to see Dr. Adrian Blake leaning against his car, a simple silver travel mug in hand, steam curling from the top. He wore no lab coat today, just a navy sweater and jeans, looking softer than she remembered him in a clinic setting. What are you doing here?" she asked, embarrassed by the redness around her eyes. "I was worried," he said plainly. "Last night didn't look like something anyone should handle alone." Her breath caught. No one had said something like that to her in years. Autumn tried to dismiss him with polite distance. "I'm fine, really." But Adrian didn't buy it. His gaze flicked to the folder she was gripping, the one filled with evidence of Caleb's betrayals. "May I?" he asked gently. Autumn hesitated, then handed it over. Adrian read quickly, but carefully, his expression tightening with every page. When he finished, he let out a slow, controlled breath. "Autumn," he said quietly, "what Caleb did isn't just immoral. It's illegal." The words landed like a jolt. Illegal. Not just cruel. Criminal. "I don't have money for lawyers," she murmured, voice cracking. But Adrian shook his head. "You don't need to worry about that. I know someone good, someone who handles cases exactly like this." Autumn blinked at him. "Why are you doing this for me?" Adrian met her eyes with a sincerity that made her chest tighten. "Because you didn't deserve what happened last night. Because your son deserves stability. And because, sometimes, life gives us the chance to help someone at the exact moment they're about to break." For the first time in days, Autumn felt the crushing weight ease. Just a little. A single tear slid down her cheek. But it wasn't from sorrow this time. It was relief. A lifeline appearing when she thought she was drowning. Adrian handed the folder back, his voice steady. "You're not alone anymore, Autumn. And you're not losing everything. Not if I can help it." Autumn Reed had spent years shrinking herself to fit into the shrinking space Caleb left for her. But the day after Adrian offered to help, something inside her finally shifted. Not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, steady ignition. A spark catching fire. It began with a simple act, opening her closet. Most of her clothes were old, faded, chosen for comfort rather than confidence. But buried behind a stack of winter coats was a navy blouse she bought on clearance years ago, one she never wore because Caleb once said it was too bold for her. Today, she put it on. Then she braided her hair back neatly, applied a touch of mascara, and looked in the mirror. She didn't see the woman who left La Serene with tears stinging her eyes. She didn't see the woman who begged Caleb to show up. She saw someone else forming. A woman who had been hurt, but not defeated. She dropped Mason at school and headed straight to the hospital's administrative building, where Adrian had referred her for a part-time opening. Her hands shook as she filled out the application. Her voice trembled during the interview. But she pushed through, answering honestly, confidently, refusing to shrink the way she had for years. By noon, she received an email. "Congratulations, Autumn. We'd love to have you on our team." Tears welled, not from sadness this time, but from the unfamiliar sensation of something going right. Still, challenges waited.
Caleb texted repeatedly. "You're overreacting. We need to settle this quietly. Don't drag other people into our issues." But Autumn didn't reply. Instead, she forwarded every message to the lawyer Adrian recommended. By late afternoon, she gathered every important document she could find: birth certificates, medical records, school forms, even the old lease Caleb was now trying to erase her from. She made copies, organized them, labeled them with shaking but determined hands. That night, while Mason played with his Lego tower, Autumn sat at the dining table, illuminated by the warm light of a cheap desk lamp, filling out legal forms she never imagined she'd need. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. But it was movement, a direction forward. And when Mason looked up and said, "Mom, you look stronger today," Autumn smiled, not pretending this time,
Because for the first time in a long, painful journey, she truly was. While Autumn was quietly rebuilding her life, Caleb Reed's world was beginning to crack, slowly at first, then with the unmistakable sound of a man losing the control he once believed he owned. It started at work. The morning after the confrontation at Le Serene, Caleb walked into the office expecting the usual respect, the usual "good morning, sir," the usual power that came with his position. But something felt off. His assistant wouldn't meet his eyes. Co-workers whispered in corners. And on his desk sat a single envelope marked "confidential." Inside was a notice from HR. "We have received multiple reports regarding inappropriate conduct and misuse of company funds. An internal investigation is now underway." Caleb's stomach dropped. He knew exactly where the reports came from. Clients he'd entertained with Harper using corporate credit cards. Trips disguised as strategy meetings. Hotel stays filed under business development. He slammed the envelope onto his desk. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. But the walls were closing in. By noon, his manager asked to see him. "We need your full cooperation, Caleb. Things don't look good." Things looked worse when Harper didn't answer any of his calls. She'd gone silent, completely. The woman he thought would stand by him had vanished the second the shine began to fade. Caleb texted her again. "We need to talk." A minute later, the message turned "read," but no reply came. His jaw clenched. He wasn't used to being ignored. Meanwhile, Autumn's silence gnawed at him. She hadn't begged, she hadn't argued, she hadn't even reacted the way he expected. Instead, she was gone, quiet, steady, untouchable. That terrified him more than her tears ever could. At home, he tried calling Mason. No answer. He tried calling Autumn. Straight to voicemail. He paced the living room, anger and panic swirling. He was losing control of every piece of the life he built, every illusion he crafted. Then came the final blow. His credit card declined when he tried to book another hotel room. A hotel he'd intended to use to win Harper back. He stared at the declined notice, rage boiling. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to have options. He was supposed to have power. Instead, in one unraveling week, Caleb Reed began to taste the consequences of his own destruction, and Autumn hadn't even fought back yet. Harper Sloan didn't intend to seek out Autumn Reed. In fact, she spent days avoiding anything that reminded her of Caleb, his voice, his cologne, his chaotic texts pleading for attention. Harper prided herself on being a woman who didn't get dragged into messy breakups. But the truth was simple. Caleb's life was burning down, and he was trying to pull her into the flames with him.
So when Harper showed up at Autumn's apartment building, she wasn't wearing confidence. She was wearing guilt. Autumn opened the door slowly, surprised and wary, to see the woman who had helped shatter her family standing on the welcome mat. "What do you want, Harper?" Autumn asked, her voice steady but exhausted. Harper swallowed hard. "I didn't come to fight. I came because you deserve to know the rest. The things Caleb didn't tell you." Autumn didn't respond, but she didn't close the door either. Harper took a breath, the kind people take before confessing something ugly. "Caleb told me he was divorcing you months ago.
He said you were unstable, that you were dragging him down, that you were draining his money." Her eyes dropped.
I believed him. Autumn's fingernails pressed into her palm. Harper continued, voice cracking slightly. "He promised me everything. A future, a home, even kids someday. But I started noticing things. Lies, missing money, secret accounts. Then I found out he was borrowing from people, dangerous people. He wasn't building a new life." She met Autumn's eyes. "He was running from the one he ruined." Autumn's breath tightened. But Harper wasn't finished. "He used your name on more than one credit line. He forged your signature. And that presentation he claimed he had the night of Mason's birthday?" She shook her head. "He was meeting a lender, someone who threatened him if he didn't pay his debts." Autumn felt a cold shiver run down her spine.
The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just financial. It was criminal. Deeper than she imagined.
"I ended things," Harper whispered. "But he won't stop calling. He thinks I'll help him recover his reputation. He thinks I'll stay quiet." She looked at Autumn with unexpected sincerity. "I'm willing to testify for you. Whatever you need, I'll tell the truth." Autumn hadn't expected sympathy. She hadn't expected honesty. But she especially hadn't expected the final words Harper spoke as she stepped back. "Caleb Reed is about to lose everything. And he knows you're the only one who can expose him." The hearing room was smaller than Autumn expected, but it felt enormous as she stepped inside, holding Mason's hand and clutching the folder Adrian had helped her organize. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the polished wooden tables.
This wasn't a trial. It wasn't a criminal case, not yet anyway. But it was the first official step. Custody, financial disclosure, and temporary orders. Caleb was already seated, straight-backed in an expensive suit he probably couldn't afford anymore. He didn't look at Autumn, not once. His lawyer, a sharp woman in a tailored gray blazer, whispered something to him as they noticed Autumn's entrance. But it wasn't Autumn who made Caleb's posture stiffen. It was Adrian Blake walking in behind her. He didn't sit next to her. He sat behind her, quiet support, undeniable presence, authority without arrogance. Just enough to make Caleb's jaw tighten. The hearing began quickly. Caleb's lawyer painted him as a hard-working provider overwhelmed by domestic pressure. Then Autumn's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence Caleb Reed drained joint funds, opened credit lines in Mrs. Reed's name without consent, and used marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship." A ripple moved through the room. Caleb shifted, but said nothing. Then came the unexpected twist. The door opened, and Harper Sloan walked in. Caleb's face drained of color. She took the stand, hands steady despite the tension thick enough to cut. "Your Honor, I'm here voluntarily. Caleb lied to me about his marriage. He used joint funds to pay for our trips, gifts, hotels. He forged Autumn's signature on 2 credit applications." Gasps. A pen dropped somewhere. Caleb's lawyer blinked rapidly, clearly unprepared. Caleb finally snapped, "Harper, what the hell are you doing?" But Harper didn't even look at him. She looked at Autumn. "I'm telling the truth." The judge took notes calmly. "Mr. Reed, This testimony raises significant concerns regarding your financial integrity and suitability for primary custody. Autumn exhaled shakily. Not triumph, but release. Then the judge turned to her. Mrs. Reed, until the investigation concludes, you will retain temporary full custody of your son. Mr. Reed will have supervised visitation only. Caleb shot to his feet.
This is insane! She's manipulating everyone!
But no one listened. Because in that room, for the first time, Autumn's voice carried more weight than Caleb's lies. And his downfall had officially begun. Autumn Reed didn't celebrate the court victory with cheers or triumph. She celebrated it with breath. A long, shaking breath she hadn't taken in years. The kind that expands a chest once crushed by fear. After the hearing, she drove Mason to the small riverside park near their apartment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm golds and soft purples. Mason kicked off his shoes and ran toward the playground, laughing as if his little heart finally felt light enough to float. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Autumn felt safe. She sat on a bench, folding her hands in her lap, letting the quiet wash over her. The weight of months, betrayal, humiliation, panic, slowly loosened its grip. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I join you?" She turned to find Adrian Blake, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. She hadn't even noticed him approach. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied, handing her one. "But I wanted to." They watched Mason climb the small rock wall, shout triumphantly, then wave at them. Adrian smiled. "He's resilient," he said. "He shouldn't have to be," Autumn whispered. There it was, the ache that still lived inside her. But this time she didn't feel alone with it. "Autumn," Adrian said gently. "Today wasn't just a legal win. It was you choosing yourself. And Mason." He paused. "That took courage." She looked away, eyes stinging. "I don't feel brave." "That's usually when people are," he murmured. Silence settled, not heavy, but warm, healing, the kind that fills cracks instead of deepening them. Mason ran back, breathless. "Mom, Adrian, come see what I built." He dragged them to a small fort he'd made with sticks and leaves. Then, out of nowhere, he reached up and took Adrian's hand with innocent trust. Autumn's chest tightened, not with fear, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. As the sky darkened, she realized something profound. She wasn't rebuilding a life from ruins. She was building a new one entirely. One where she made the choices. One where Mason felt protected. One where kindness stood beside her when cruelty walked away. And for the first time since losing everything, Autumn Reed could finally imagine a future that didn't hurt to think about. 6 months later, the city felt different to Autumn Reed. Not because Manhattan had changed, but because she had. The custody investigation concluded with Caleb's financial misconduct fully exposed. Harper's testimony, combined with banking evidence and forged signatures, left the judge with little patience for his excuses. Caleb lost his job, his professional license was suspended, and the company filed charges for embezzlement. For a man who once thrived on power and perception, the fall was brutal. Reporters contacted him. Friends distanced themselves. Employers refused to touch his resume. And in a final twist of poetic justice, the lender he lied to took legal action, leaving Caleb scrambling with debts he could no longer hide behind Autumn's name. He had built his kingdom on lies, and now he stood in the ruins, alone. Meanwhile, Autumn's life blossomed quietly, steadily. Her job at the hospital became permanent. Co-workers admired her work ethic. Mason thrived, laughing, learning, drawing pictures of a home filled with warmth rather than tension. But the biggest change wasn't in circumstance. It was in her heart.
One evening, Autumn and Mason were invited to a community charity gala, the kind of elegant event she once felt too small to walk into. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She wore a simple but stunning ivory dress, her hair curled softly over her shoulders. When she arrived, Adrian was waiting. He didn't stare, he didn't gasp. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at something he's thankful exists in the world. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "And I feel happy," Autumn replied, the truth full and unshaking. Throughout the night, they talked, laughed, moved with an ease that felt natural. Mason tugged Adrian's hand, showing him exhibits and decorations, claiming him with the pure acceptance only a child can give. Then, later, outside under the evening lights, Adrian took a breath, nervous for the first time since she'd met him. "Autumn, I don't want to rush anything. I don't want to replace anything. But I care about you, about Mason. And if you'd ever consider a future where I'm part of it, I'd be honored." Autumn felt tears warm her eyes, but not from hurt, from healing, from possibility, from the realization that she had survived the storm and stepped into a gentler world.
She took his hand. "I'd like that," she whispered.
Behind them, Mason cheered. And just like that, Autumn Reed walked into a new life. Loved, steady, and finally free. So, our story has come to an end. And if you're still here, listening to these final words, then something in this journey must have touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. Maybe it reminded you of your own strength, or maybe of a wound you're still trying to understand. And that's okay, truly. Because life sometimes breaks us in places we didn't expect. But as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The obstacle is the way." What hurts us often becomes the very thing that shapes us. And Autumn's story reminds us of something powerful. You do not need someone to choose you in order to be worthy. You choose yourself every day, one tiny brave step at a time. Healing doesn't always come with fireworks.
Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a new job, a kind hand, a child's laughter, or simply waking up one day and realizing the fear is no longer louder than your hope. So if this story moved you, even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but so these messages of healing can reach someone else who needs them right now. And remember, you deserve gentleness, and you deserve a new beginning. This story is a work of fiction, created purely for emotional reflection and entertainment. The characters, events, and situations, including names, locations, and behaviors, are entirely imagined and do not portray any real individuals or real-life incidents. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental. Our goal is to explore themes of healing, self-worth, and personal growth through storytelling, not to represent or criticize anyone in real life. Viewers should understand that the narrative is crafted to inspire, comfort, and encourage resilience, especially for those who may relate to similar emotional experiences. Please enjoy the content responsibly, knowing it is created with the intention of storytelling only. Thank you for supporting the channel and helping us build a safe, understanding community for everyone.